Welcome to our Savvy series. I'm Catherine Magaña here with Rachel Ivanovich. And today we're going to have a discussion on the sandwich generation, women balancing parents, kids, their own retirement plans, and their lives. So it actually holds true. I know right before this, Rachel and I were just kind of having
joking about a
couple things. We're like, oh, wait a minute, we're actually living this. So we definitely have
this is our lives.
Yes, we can definitely share some experiences with you. But before we dive into that, I thought I'd share some information. So the Mental Health America actually has reported that the sandwich generation refers to young to middle-aged adults who are simultaneously raising children and supporting their aging parents. And about a quarter of U.S. adults, so 23%, are part of the sandwich generation. And so that's kind of interesting. I didn't realize sometimes you feel like it's just me or, there's not a lot of individuals going through this as well. But I thought that was kind of interesting when you put that in perspective.
It's interesting. The more people I talk to, the more people it applies to who are, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah. So imagine you have some teenagers and you're getting ready to help them apply for colleges. And then you have your parents potentially, and there's doctor appointments and meds.
Right. You're sitting there doing the FAFSA, and then your mom calls and says, "Can you take me to the doctor?"
Yes, you're like, okay, let me just drop everything. And then you're also thinking, okay, well,
and you're working full time.
Am I ever going to retire? But I think sometimes when you're, retirement, if you're in your 40s or 50s, maybe you're thinking, I still have a little ways to go. But the reality is you really need to be mindful and make sure that you are taking care of yourself as well.
So they're referring to this as the triple challenge of the sandwich generation. So what do you feel like today? Egg salad, tuna,
right?
Veggie, ham sandwich?
And so the first thing with that is kind of the cash flow. Are you helping with some expenses? You're paying potentially for kids or adult kids, and then you're potentially maybe helping with some family members.
And it's getting harder and harder for the adult children because it's so expensive. Rent is so expensive, and it's hard for them to move out and stay near home. And so maybe you're subsidizing their rent, or maybe they're living with you and not paying, or maybe they're paying only a little bit. And that definitely impacts your cash flow.
Yeah. What's interesting, you say that. I'm pretty much right there.
You are right
there. We have twins that are going to college.
And two at once.
Yes, in a couple years.
Good for you.
So we've been saving for that. And then I have aging parents. My mom's actually 88 years old, and my daddy's a little younger. He's, I think, 76 years old. And so, but my mom, she's been a big part of our lives. She actually helped us with the kids when they were little, and she even lived with us for a little bit. And so I did firsthand have an opportunity. She was helping us, but we were also helping her. I was taking to her doctor's appointments. But now that my dad lives kind of in the area and my parents are still together, once my dad retired, he kind of took over and is helping her now with some of the doctor's appointments, which is great. But then just in general, it gets expensive. So occasionally my sister Natasha and I help with if there's like a major medical or dental or something that's out of the ordinary.
Same thing. Same here.
We're kicking in to see what we can do to help.
Yeah.
But then also, I want to retire at some point. I know I'm young and I still have ways to go, but I am also saving for retirement.
But it does
too.
Create a cash flow crunch for sure.
It can. And you have to think about it. It's like, okay, where am I allocating my money, and is it important to you? I mean, it's important for me to help
back
my
to the
family.
core values. What's most important, and then secondly, time crunch and the stress that's with that. So for instance, making sure our youngest son is looking to actually buy a house, and so I'm helping him with the mortgage application and helping him, get all his documents together for that. But then at the same time, mom is undergoing some cancer treatment, so I'm taking her to doctor's appointments and making sure that she's okay, and working a full-time job. So actually two full-time, not full-time, but they feel like they should be full-time jobs, but it's just a lot. So that is definitely one part of the triple challenge.
Yeah, and then the third part is the emotional toll. Yeah. So yes, you're caring, you're loving, you want to do it all, but the reality is, and sometimes you feel guilty if you're not in one area and you're here or you're there, and it's just getting pulled in different directions. But I think in the long run, having that balance and, like you said, going back to your core values, what's important to you, and I think, but it is definitely something to consider.
And I think it's important to also watch the resentment if you have siblings who aren't helping.
Yeah.
So there are ways, and we'll get into that, of how to mitigate that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of some financial planning strategies to be thinking about if you're kind of in that sandwich generation. So number one is, we talked about is you should put retirement first.
Put on your oxygen mask first.
Absolutely. So we hear it when we're on airplanes. You take care of you first, and then you can
take
help
care of
everybody, others. So you don't want to sacrifice your future. And it's interesting. I mean, sometimes it's hard. I mean, we had a client that we worked with, and her goal was to get her son kids fully funded for college and put money towards that. Yeah.
I didn't put any money in
for herself.
For myself. I know. I'm totally guilty.
Yes. So it's like, once again.
But you can't take out a loan for retirement. I didn't want my kids to have student loans. So you had a guilty as charged. But I think you're absolutely right. Fund you got to. Otherwise you're going to be scrambling later. I'm scrambling. I'm not.
And then you have kind of the budget. So looking at, how are you allocating? Are you putting some for retirement? Are you allocating to some family members or kids and those aging parents?
And have boundaries.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that if you can afford it, I mean, if you can't afford it, that's another story. But if you can make it work and if that's a priority for you. And then it's looking at, insurance. So there's different ways potentially that there's resources that are out there. And even what we hear about a lot is those clients that have gone through this, and then they're like, wait a minute, I don't want to put my kids through this.
Or the clients that actually did invest in long-term care insurance are so grateful that they did, and so they're telling their friends, and we see that as a financial blind spot a lot.
Yeah. So there's some, you can either self-insure or you can look at some life insurance with long-term care riders, or there's long-term care. So there's some different ways you can look at some of those costs and expenses. And then, obviously that's long-term care, but then the medical and looking at your Medicare and doing Medicare planning. And we obviously have some specialists that we recommend.
What about disability insurance?
Yeah, that's
just in case. I mean, we don't talk about that a lot, but it can help protect your income if, for instance, caregiving interferes with your career, and don't forget to overlook life insurance potentially for dependents.
Oh, that's true.
Actually, that really I took out a policy when my son was, 5 years old, and it wasn't very much, but I didn't even realize that later, by doing so, because he developed a condition where he had like a tumor in his head, and then he became uninsurable. And so because he had that policy from when he was 5 years old, I've been able to add on every single year.
That was helpful.
And so we just need to keep that policy going.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so then another thing to consider, I guess, is the tax benefits, which is your lane here.
That's true. So you can qualify for dependent care credits if you're doing, caregiving for an adult. If, for instance, you have to go to work, or if you have younger kids who are under age 13, so that dependent care credit. So there's definitely some deductions that are available, or if you're paying for your parents' care and they qualify as your dependent, you may be able to write off their medical expenses. Okay. And then, of course, long-term care insurance, and if you're helping to pay for their medical premiums over and above any Medicare, so a lot of people have supplemental insurance. If they're your dependent and you're helping them, you can write those things off.
Nice. And then another thing to consider is share the responsibilities. Like you mentioned, if there's other family members.
Siblings.
Yeah. And that's hard.
Yeah,
I mean, I usually, like my sister Natasha and I, we're pretty in tune with, if something comes up, let's divide and conquer. But there's also things that come up that I don't ask. I just don't, I just do because.
Well, and you're here and she's not local. My sister's in Texas, so it's harder. So
when you're in the day-to-day, or you see things or hear things, and so I just don't want.
But it's important to actually have the conversation so that you don't get resentful, because during this, this cancer treatment for my mom, I started to feel that way. And so, I reached out to my sister. I said, I really need you to get out here maybe once a month. So she was able to use miles and take some time and, come out to. But I think that there are other ways where maybe one person's helping with the finances and the other's taking the parent to doctor's appointments so that you
can share the responsibility a little bit.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, it's also, if you have these conversations, you also get a better idea of what are your wishes. Like I know my mom, she wants to be at home. Like she doesn't want to go anywhere else. So she wants to be, and some people are like, I want to go to retirement, assisted living. I want that extra care there. And so it's having those conversations and knowing what are the wishes. We actually had a client a few months ago where we looked at their financial plan. We actually, and they had their son get on the call with us as well. And anyway, he was very proactive. I mean, he was really engaged and involved. And they decided as a family that the parents ended up moving out of their home into another kind of assisted living, where there's different transitions and things in place. And it was a conversation that they didn't want to be reactive; they want to be proactive, and so it was.
And preparing ahead, honestly, is so much better than waiting for a crisis. Because when you're in the emergency situation, trying to make decisions is so difficult. And so, like you said, ask mom, dad, what are your wishes? I actually had that conversation with my mom. We were driving in the car, and she's like, I don't want to talk about this. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, it can be a difficult conversation, but I'd rather know what she wants than have to make that decision myself.
Yeah. And then finally, get legal and estate planning in order. So obviously, we encourage you to, if you are in the sandwich generation, making sure your parents have wills, trusts, power of attorneys,
healthcare directives.
Yes. And then I guess even if your kids are over 18, then you still also need to look at power of attorneys.
Absolutely, because otherwise, if your adult child ends up in the emergency room, you may not be able to call in and get information or help them with their finances if you don't have those correct power of attorneys in place. So don't forget, when they're over 18, you want to make sure you have those for the kids.
So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but really having those conversations, they matter, and we think it's really important. So if you have the younger kids and they're getting ready for college, it's perhaps having that conversation with them and letting them know, I might cover this amount, or are you going to get scholarships, or you may have to get some loans, or I think being very transparent.
Work study. Yeah. Well, they have to have some skin in the game, I feel, but I think having the conversations ahead of time and really letting them know, this is what I'll pay for, and this is what you're going to have to be responsible for, and then working together. So that it doesn't just fall on you as the parent, and that you're not signing the Parent Plus loan, and then all of a sudden it's impacting your credit, which was, a big surprise for me when we were talking about, potentially you'll have to take out this loan, and then I would be a co-signer. So definitely do your your homework and do your due diligence when you're working with your kids about funding college.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mentioned I have twins that are getting ready to go to college in a couple years, and we've been having the money talk and conversations since they were little. I mean, we have been very open about college, what it costs, in-state, out-of-state, and at the end of the day, we'll guide them or make sure, but it's their decision too. Like where do they want to go, and we've talked about the cost, and they actually did in one of their math classes a few years ago. They did a little cost analysis.
Oh, did they?
And so that kind of gave them a different perspective of what it really cost. But once again, like I said, there's grants, there's scholarships, there's other funding mechanisms.
And honestly, college might not be for everyone.
True.
Think outside the box. I mean, all 5 of our kids did something different. And there's a lot of good trade schools, and Miracosta College. What were they talking about? They actually offer a bachelor's degree, and it's so inexpensive to go to school there now. So there are definitely different options. And
even the 529 plans now, they're allowing for you to use some of that money, not just for the accredited colleges.
They're allowing you to use it for tutoring. Did you know that?
I just saw that.
I thought that was fantastic.
So I think there's a lot of flexibility and change that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And then with your parents, once again, having those conversations about what their wishes are. And I think that's important. Like you said, just you don't want to be guessing later. And then once again, it's okay to ask for help and talk to your siblings. And
it's important to ask for help.
Yeah, I think it's, at the end of the day, it's a family affair, and making sure everybody's on the same page.
That's right.
So a couple action items to kind of think about that we went over is, look at, how much are you putting in your retirement? Are you maximizing that?
Are you on track?
Yes. Where are you at with your own financial plan?
Are you at least getting your employer match?
Exactly. And then you might perhaps revisit your lifestyle and your budget, and kind of look at, where am I allocating some of my money for this, and how does and how much are you spending? Because you may not even realize it.
Or where am I spending money that I don't need to be spending it anymore? Yeah. I think it's so easy just to put things on automatic, and you have 18 subscriptions, and maybe it's good to go back and rethink. Do I really need that? Do I really need this?
Well, that's the thing now with cable. At one point, we're like, "This is expensive," but now all those
subscriptions, they add up.
Like, wait a minute.
It's like $10 here and $20 there,
and then they go up. It's like they all of a sudden went from 10 to 20, and you have to pay attention. And then maybe scheduling a family meeting and having the money talk with you. Having the money talk either with overall with your immediate family, and then maybe with your extended family as well. And then once again, we talked about your wills and your trust, so you should connect with your estate planning attorney.
So the proactive proactive wealth process. That's the fourth
Yes,
pillar.
that's us.
So fourth quarter's coming up. So start thinking about legacy
Yes.
and look at your wills, your powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and make sure you have all of those updated, that your beneficiaries are in line, and so on and so forth.
And we're going to be doing a webinar coming up in
That's
fourth
right.
quarter. So we'll
With
be doing
an estate planning attorney.
Yeah, so that's kind of in line with that. And then once again, don't do this alone. I mean, that's what we're here for as financial planners and tax planners and estate plan. I mean, all these different professionals are there to help you and guide you. And so it is important to look at what are you doing and why and what's the impact overall with your plan. So I know we talked about there's a lot going on with those that are in this sandwich generation.
It's not easy.
Yes, and so it's one of those things. It's we're seeing it more and more, and it's a real thing. And so we know you're getting pulled in all different directions. But we think with having a clear plan or idea of what you're doing is important, and having those conversations. And so we're happy to set up a consultation with you or a phone call if you want to talk over your specific situation. You can reach us at 760-692-5700. And we want to thank you for getting savvy with us today about your finances. And remember to savvy up. Please stay tuned for important disclosures. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results, and the indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional. Savvy Woman Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor with the SEC.